I like to, with my groups, just jump right into the deep end. So a lot of the time, the first piece that we'll do with a group, whether it's a video or an article or a web page, what have you, involves one of their higher up stakeholders. So if you can immediately show the value and the benefit of the work to that higher tier, on the political scheme of that organization, it generally ripples down. So, if the dean trusts you, then the people that are underneath them in a reporting structure tend to get a little bit more leeway, and then they can work with you and you can kind of expand upon what you've done in that initial start.
The healthcare and higher education industries in the US are sectors that are highly regulated and at times conservative. As a B2B marketer, it's a delicate balance to come up with creative campaigns for clients while being compliant at the same time. So, how can B2B marketers increase B2B brand visibility and get outcomes? Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klett. Today, I'll be talking to Mariah Tang, who will be answering this question. She's the Chief Content Marketing Officer at Stamats, specializing in content writing and strategy for healthcare, higher ed, and research institutions. Tune in to find out more about what this B2B marketer's mission is. Okay, and here we go. Mariah Tang, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christian. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you on, and shout out to Chris Raposo. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know this is going to be interesting because this is up your alley, in your wheelhouse, whatever analogy you want to use. But if you don't mind, let's just dive right in.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. All right, so Mariah, I'm going to say you're on a mission to deliver focused and intentional experiences for clients in healthcare and higher education. So for this conversation, I wanted to zero in on the following topic, which is a pretty meaty one, if I do say so myself. And we're going to unpack it from there. So that topic is how to increase your B2B brand visibility and get outcomes. So I'm going to kick off the conversation with the following question. In our previous conversation, you mentioned something along the lines of healthcare and higher education being industry segments that are highly regulated and at times, or oftentimes, conservative and traditional. So how do you think, just from a top level perspective, how can marketing teams in these segments increase brand visibility without sacrificing the trust factor?
Yeah, I love this question, Christian, and it's one that we get pretty frequently across both higher ed and healthcare. So one of the ways that we've seen organizations grow their trust with their audience and that back and forth communication is by providing thought leadership. And that's not a novel concept. People have heard about this all the time in the B2C space, but in B2B, you don't find that as often. So when you can get your subject matter experts, your brand champions out there in front of your audience, sharing their insights, sharing what works and what doesn't work, it can really be impactful for endearing your brand to your audience, to your buyers or your dealers or whoever it is that you're trying to connect with. So, for example, we work with several research institutions across the US. Some of them do patient care. Some of them do just research. Some of them do a combination of both. And one of our groups has shared with us that because of their thought leadership programs that they run with Stamats as their support, they have really increased their earned media, which is when organizations reach out to you and ask for your opinion, ask for your subject matter experts' opinions, offer to give insights. So Forbes, Morning Brew, publications like that deal in these different types of stories and need those expert insights. Our client has told us that 70% of their earned media comes from the articles that we help them write. So thought leadership can be very impactful, not just in the B2C space, but also in the B2B space.
Yeah, absolutely love that with thought leadership. I mean, I know that term gets thrown around quite loosely. I did have a follow-up question for you because I know that this can be a challenge, regardless of the vertical that we're referring to. Certainly a research institution or certainly a healthcare institution or in fact, higher ed, they have their subject matter experts, right? They have people on staff that are very knowledgeable. They have so much knowledge, and I think it's also a question of being able to package that and being able to communicate that to to the broader market. Sometimes it's not easy to recruit these subject matter experts, right? Sometimes it takes a little bit of prodding, right? There's a little bit of reluctance for them to be put into the spotlight, as it were. From your experience, how do you convince these subject matter experts that it's not just in their interest, but it's in the interest of the organizations they represent to put themselves out there and to, communicate that thought leadership piece? Like, in your experience, like how do you get them over to your side?
Have you been spying on me? This is what I do
I
every
have.
day.
I have. I
No,
have.
you're exactly right. So
Yeah.
we'll stick with the researcher
Sure.
example. So a
Mm.
lot of the times, research individuals, I'm not trying to paint too broad of a stroke here, but a lot of the times they have their specific niche, they have their interest, they have their little edge of science that they feel comfortable talking about, whether that's basic science completely behind the scenes, clinical, which is more in the space with the students and with the patients, or translational, bench to bedside is kind of what they call it. So if you have a basic scientist who is maybe doing research with fruit flies or worms or mouse models, they're probably not going to be super excited about talking about how that science could in 5 years, 10 years impact a human being. But what we can talk about is, tell me how you conducted this experiment. Tell me how you set up your hypothesis. What is the end goal of this research that you hope one day to see? How are the data that you're pooling together now reflective of your hypothesis? And so you can get them kind of talking, speak in their language, express interest. A lot of the times they feel like we're just these folks in the lab and nobody wants to hear from us, but the work that they're doing is so impactful at a foundational level. We couldn't have the medications or the procedures or the different academic subtopics that we have in research in higher ed without the work of those lab experts and those researchers behind the scenes. So when you show that you genuinely appreciate what they're doing, that you genuinely are interested in what they're doing, a lot of the times you can see them light up. And that's why I always say, I love talking with faculty. I love talking with surgeons and doctors, but talking with researchers is one of my favorite things. They are one of the least tapped individuals and groups of individuals in an organization, and they have some of the most interesting stories to tell.
I 100% agree with that. Like, it almost seems like a lifetime ago in a previous agency, I was working with a company that dealt with industry adhesives, and we went into one of their labs, right? And they had the lab technicians there, and without giving too much away, they basically produced adhesives that go into what you see on cell phones, for example, right, or in shoes. But on the face level or on the surface level, like, you wouldn't notice it by just looking at that individual component. But then, when you, like, to your point, when you start displaying interest and you start asking them, okay, tell me more about this, like, where where in the cell phone or the mobile phone does this component go into, and what purpose does it serve? And it's interesting how, with looking at it from a journalist's perspective, as you well know, like, there's 8 to 10 different ways to tell the same story, right? Or 8 to 10 different angles, rather. And from there, you're unlocking all these doors, right? Where these people would rather, instead of, like, just visiting the lab and just saying, okay, so this is what you work on, this is the equipment. Well, you go up to them and say, like, hey, Jack, tell me more about, what you do, and what purpose does this adhesive serve? And it was interesting to see how very open they were to sharing, because now suddenly somebody is like, oh, someone's actually interested in this work beyond beyond this laboratory, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is about key pitfalls. So again, on the topic of building that brand visibility without sacrificing trust, what are some of the key pitfalls that you think marketers should avoid, and what should they be doing instead?
Yeah, especially in the B2B space, there are a couple of common, I wouldn't even say mistakes, just kind of misperceptions that marketers tend to have. And one is that frequently teams forget that their clients and that their audience are actually human beings and not just another brand or another company. That means these are people that have challenges throughout their day. These are people that deal with and work with end users. And so they're hearing all of these different questions and concerns and complaints and situations that need to be resolved. But if we as the organization are only throwing our marketing messages and here's this thing you can buy and here's some details about our product or our service, it's not really getting to the heart of what they're looking for. So if you can work with your audiences, work with those people and not just the institutions, you can understand what challenges they are facing, how your services and product might be able to help remedy those problems and make their jobs and their lives easier. When you make somebody's life easier, they're more likely to come back to you and continue doing business with you. So that's one thing. And I think the other is a pretty long-standing marketing principle that's just super easy to forget when we have lots of stakeholder pressure and lots of market pressure, is that we're not trying to sell a product or a service. We're trying to sell a solution, an answer to a problem. When we demonstrate, I think there are a lot of good examples out there in the manufacturing space and in the retail space. But when you're thinking maybe about higher ed, for example, you want to sell this degree, you want to sell enrollment into your school, but what you're really selling is a better career for this individual or a better livelihood that they can make for themselves and their family, a more dependable future with longevity to their skill set. And so you are, yes, getting them to come in, trading money for services, but you're really trading their time and investment in your attention and their attention into your marketing endeavors for a better outcome long term and not just that acute win.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love how you brought up those 2 points. Do you think to the first point, again, to what you were saying, like maybe it's not a pitfall, but it's again something that perhaps marketing teams tend to forget when we drown in all the in the everyday work and being busy and what have you. But do you feel sometimes that the teams tend to forget or not forget, but they sometimes the mistakes that they make are a result of their lack of understanding of who the actual target audience is. And I'd like to go a step further than that. It's not just the lack of understanding of the target audience, but it's also like what that customer journey looks like.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
that's very astute. I mean, a lot of groups
Mm.
just go in and say, well, this is my experience with it. So I assume everybody else has the same experience, but you
Right.
probably don't have the same interaction with your own products or services as that end user does. And your client will definitely have a different perspective of how useful your product is. And if they're a good client, though, they're willing to share that with you, even if it hurts your feelings. But yeah, certainly understanding the needs right now of your audience and not just 3 to 5 years ago or historically, the challenges that are coming down the pike that your product might be able to serve, some of that future facing work as well as the acute needs and the acute struggles of your audience. You have to have all of those things in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know what, Mariah, for this next question, I thought like, okay, I'm going to have a little bit of fun here. Like, I don't want to just throw this question about like, oh, what do we do now with all this AI, right? Like, I mean, that tends to be a very common question on podcasts. So I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with it and just ask you about, um, I suppose because we're living in this era now where everybody's talking about AI, and I don't know who you follow on LinkedIn, but I'm seeing so many of these like, okay, Claude prompts and comment prompt, and I'll send it to you. But
The bro tech.
I know, right? This hack chasing, as I like to call it. But in this era of like continuous content saturation and volumes of AI generated content appearing online, and you're a trained content strategist, you can see it right away, right? So, but let's look at this from a more constructive perspective, right? So, what is an unconventional approach to content that you've seen, ideally recently or in the past 1 to 2 years, that you thought can successfully boost visibility, and why do you think that approach was so effective?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to my example that I was talking about before. When we're working with researchers, typically in the past, you would see a prepped press release or a prepped article with a cute little spot reserved for such and such researcher to say something really smart. And then you would have this whole like, here's where all of our funders, came from. These are the awards this specific researcher has won. And then, here's what we found in this research or what we hope to find. Big kudos to everybody involved. Instead of, I'm not saying that those pieces aren't important because they absolutely are. How else are you going to, show that your institution is worthwhile for funding and things like that? But what really matters to that end audience is the outcome that will impact them down the line. So I've seen more and more basic science institutions either partnering with other organizations to tell a more holistic story or encouraging their basic scientists to consider the possibilities of what their research could in fact one day do. So we'll talk about the hard data, we'll talk about what we know, and then we'll talk about what we hope will be accomplished by this someday. We don't have to get too far out into the wilderness. Nobody is doing this basic scientific work just for the fun of it. I mean, they're doing it for a specific reason. And if we can talk long term about our goals and long term about our continued engagement with our audiences, that's the kind of thing that's going to resonate. Yes, what you're doing right now is cool. It is fascinating. These discoveries will impact and ripple down the line. What do we maybe think that those ripples might be? What's the next phase of our research? What are the we don't talk about what outcomes we hope will happen because we don't want to, muddy the waters with that research. But when these findings are complete, what do you anticipate will be the next step? And just give people a reason to come back and learn more. So that kind of future-facing storytelling, not just retroactive or here's what's happening right now. We're seeing a lot of that happening in this space, as well as thought leadership in different types of takes. And so not just a talking head person, not just the, director of research coming out and saying, here are some fabulous things we did. It's the actual people from the lab. It's the actual people, from the administration desk who see individuals and giving that person's story, telling the full picture instead of just the outcome.
Yeah, no, that's a great approach. I love that. It's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like B2B, like the B2B space is so notorious for like producing content or initiatives that seem very dry.
The AI press release, yes.
Yeah. On the surface, and I'm using. I know that's a very polite term for it, right? Like dry, and it's creativity can be a little bit challenging, right? And I know that, like, in contrast to B2C, like, we usually can't, especially with the industries we work with, we can't just go nuts, right? It has to be kind of like we have to exercise a certain level of restraint. At the end of the day, also, we're dealing with a different group of target audiences who tend to be of a specific like role and a senior level within an organization and things of that nature, right? So it's always important to keep that in mind, but at the same time, it's like, yes, but there has to be, to your point, there has to be a more interesting way to be able to communicate this, right? So taking your the research institute as an example, right? Like, rather than having one person come out, like, how about everybody else that was working behind the scenes, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I love about B2B, because there's always an opportunity to make it more interesting, right? Whereas in B2C, it's like I'm not saying that they've done it all already, but like, yeah, it's pretty much expected that it's going to be out there. Whereas in the B2B space, again, depending on the vertical, you still have a lot of opportunities to make that story even more interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many, it's like peeling back an onion. You ask one question, they give you an answer. It leads to another question and another. And by the time you get down to it, yes, the research is the research happening is the lead-in topic, but what really you can uncover is the personal reason behind that research and so many other rippling effects that might appeal to donors or peers that you want to come and work with you or potential buyers, because people love those signals that work matters to me or that work matters to my audience. And when you can give more of that below the surface, you're creating this different level of engagement instead of just, hey, buy our stuff. It's look at these wonderful people that put their heart and soul into this work.
Absolutely. All right, for this next question, and I promise I haven't been spying on you, all right? But this is something that I am 110% sure you've dealt with and are continuing to deal with. Just put yourself in this scenario. Okay, you're in a client meeting, probably meeting with a board of directors or members of senior management, and you're doing your pitch, you're doing your spiel, and to which the response basically is either confusion, um, requiring clarification, or straight out pushback. And what I mean by pushback is like, yeah, look, Mariah, you're telling us about building B2B brand visibility, but for us, that's nothing more than a vanity metric. So how do you deal with that? Like if you ever get that pushback, and I'm sure you have.
Oh yes, like every day. And you know what? I'll start by saying, Christian, I don't necessarily prefer to work with groups that just do whatever Stamats says. Like we
Sure.
like working with institutions that say, well, why? And
Hmm.
what's the justification for putting our dollars here, our energy here?
Yep.
And it's good because we have been around for a long time, so we can bring a lot of data, but we can also bring a lot of flexibility because we're small and we're agile. So the numbers are very important. We have lots of dashboards that we typically bring. We'll bring data directly from the institution if we have access to that, like Google Analytics, form fills, things like that. But we'll also bring anecdotal evidence and what we're seeing as trends in the industry through other clients or through other organizations that we work with. So when a group says adamantly, we're not sure this is the right approach, we can say, totally understand. Why don't we A/B test, or why don't we try your method for X number of days and see if you like that performance? If you don't, we can adjust and we can try this other plan that we brought forward and see what works best for your audience. We don't ever want to assume that this, Chat GPT spit out this marketing plan and we're going to do it because that's what everybody's doing, right? We want to start with a baseline and we want to customize that for what works for your region, your audience, your team. A large team can do a lot more than a small team sometimes. Sometimes there are too many people and it just, too many cooks in the kitchen or what have you. So we generally go in with a pretty open mind. Here are the best practices. This is what we know based on the data. Over here is where we can start to experiment a little bit more. And if you're comfortable with that, great, we'll take the lead. If you have your own ideas, we'll definitely support that and we'll help you figure out what the best option is. But if you're going to push back, expect us to do the same because like I said, we don't necessarily like to work with groups as well that just were like, okay, we also don't do that. We say, well, why? Why do you want to do that? What's your outcome? Well, hey, have you thought about maybe trying it this way instead? And a lot of the times, just by opening that discourse and that flexibility, you can come to an agreement or you can come to a path that maybe wasn't what either party thought about in the first place anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know what your experience has been, but it certainly has been mine. Um, Clients that usually just say okay, um, that's a red flag, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a red flag,
They
right?
don't end up getting what they want. And a lot of the time they come in not knowing what they want or what
Hmm.
to ask. And so
That's
by
it.
us asking those additional questions, we can
Yeah,
help them get to that. And sometimes it's opposite. Like we think we understand what you're trying to do, but let us ask a
right.
few more questions or listen to the questions you have so we can refine and meet where it makes the most sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do this with every client. This is not just like something where we get, if the client gives us what I call a wishy-washy brief. This applies to everyone across the board. We always start by having, well, not just a kickoff meeting, but also doing something what we call a diagnostic canvas. And what that really means is really digging deep into, and I'm sure you do the same, is like, well, what are your business objectives, or what are the objectives you want to achieve for this year, for your organization, for, in your case, your institute? What's holding you back from achieving that? Who do you want to reach out to with regards to these initiatives you want to roll out, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have any information or data that can help inform us a little bit more about these, these target groups, right? Because sometimes it's more than one group, right? So it's really like almost like them coming to you or to me with a request, but then we're saying we could potentially help you, but let us just do a bit more of a deep dive in terms of like asking all these questions first. And that way, expectations are then aligned and managed, right? Versus them saying, well, okay, well, we want you to build a landing page and we want to generate traffic to it.
Who doesn't?
Okay. Why? Right? Like, why and who and when and how, right? Like, what's wrong with what you're doing right now, right? So things of that nature, right? Oh, you've come across this all the time, I'm sure. We just spoke about it a couple of minutes ago. But in your line of work, there's a fine line between doing something that's creative, but also being compliant. So how do you and your clients and their marketing teams strike that fine balance between fostering creativity and working within strict legal and compliance ramifications in healthcare and higher ed and research? Because I know
Yeah.
that can be a challenging one.
Oh yeah, for sure. I like to, with my groups, just jump right into the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the time, the first piece that we'll do with a group, whether it's a video or an article or a web page, what have you, involves one of their higher up stakeholders. So if you can immediately show the value and the benefit of the work to that higher tier of on the political scheme of that organization, it generally ripples down. So, if the dean trusts you, then the people that are underneath them in a reporting structure tend to get a little bit more leeway, and then they can work with you and you can kind of expand upon what you've done in that initial start. So I would say, if possible, involve those stakeholders as early as possible. Show them what you're doing, show them the why, explain the potential ROI of what you're doing, and then work with that group to gain that approval right from the start. So once you've demonstrated that, yes, we do understand your brand, yes, we do understand your goals, and here's how we're going to get you there, it opens up the door to push the boundaries just a little bit. Again, you don't ever want to do anything that could potentially put the brand at risk or the end user's data and all of those things, but you definitely want to establish the voice right away, make sure the stakeholders are okay with your direction, and then build out your plan from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. It has to be a well thought out plan, right? And I guess, like, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, when we say creative in our in the B2B segment, it's not the same creative that you would look at if you're thinking about like an FMCG brand, for example, right? Like, we know we know we can't really, as tempting as it is, we can't really go down that road, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
always guidelines with every brand, but then you learn how close you can get to them, and how close your audience wants you to get to them too.
And I suppose, like, also, and this has certainly been my experience. I think it also really depends on the client's appetite slash ability to give you permission
Mm-hmm.
to give you a bit of creative license, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are some clients, and I'm sure you have them too, that say, "Oh, Mariah, we want this to be really out there. We want to really stand out and be creative." And then you come back with something, and they're like, "Oh, that's a little too creative," right? Like,
Yeah.
right?
A little too much. Yeah.
A little too much. Let's trim the tree a little bit more. And by the time you trim everything, oh, that's just exactly like what you're doing right now, right?
Yeah. There are a lot
Right.
of good examples that are out in the field already. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when we come to the table, we'll say, well, here's this very left of center, idea over here, and then here's this very right of center idea over here. How far do you want to go either way?
Yeah.
And help them kind of like a thermometer, like a slider. Do we want to get warmer, colder? Are we in the middle? And that helps us gauge, what's the tolerance for risk.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been looking forward to asking you this question, so I'm very curious how you're going to answer this. But if you were given a limited marketing budget, okay, and the board of directors only gave you 90 days to deliver results, what would you do to increase your brand's visibility and get outcomes? Walk us through the steps and what the key components are in that
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. I really thought about this question a lot. And when my coworkers hear this, they're gonna laugh at me. But I would say, if you don't have one already, we're gonna launch a content marketing strategy. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like I said at the very top of our conversation, this isn't a new thing, but it definitely, in today's world and the way that people search, has a very different meaning. And so what I typically would suggest, especially if the budget was, unlimited, if we get a couple of brand champions, a couple of those people who really have good insights and a good way of describing the outcomes associated with our products and services, ask for some of their time. I'm talking just a couple of hours. If you can sit and have a half an hour conversation with them, record it just like you and I are doing right now, you have the capability to pull out, 2, 3 different long form topic ideas. So you get the gist, get the meat, get the story angle from that individual, and then your teams disperse, do the research that is required to pull sources, pull data, pull audience information, and so forth. Build out 2 to 3 long form pieces of content. So a couple thousand word article, 3 to 5 minute video, something that's meaty. From there, you can take those pieces and then break them down into, 5 to 10 short videos, short bursts of content, infographics, carousels across social media, the emails, text blasts, whatever your preferred channels are. We call this at Stamats the asset remix. Other groups have called it create once, publish everywhere. You've heard this type of same thing over time. The reason this is so important right now, and this is where I would put my pretend budget if I, had one chance, is because all of these AI search engines, Google, all of these different platforms where people are looking for answers, social media, they all amalgamate into these chatbot type databases. And so Google, for example, will pull video from Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube. YouTube is the number 2 search platform across the world. So if you're not using that for your products and services, you may be missing out on a good chunk of people. The second tier to that, besides the maximizing your assets from your SME interviews, the second tier to that, I would say, is really thinking about what your audience is asking in that research phase. So because ChatGPT and Gemini and some of these other groups really, let's just be frank, they have tanked organic traffic on websites. That doesn't mean people aren't researching anymore. It just means they're finding that information off of your website. So when they come to your site from those different chatbots, they're probably more engaged because they're ready to do something. They're ready to take an action. All of those mid-funnel research pieces are happening out on these different platforms. So what does that mean? Your content marketing and your website content, social media, all of the different platforms has to answer the questions that those individuals are asking. So these are the how do I, what's the benefit of, why do I need, what happens if I don't have type questions. Answer those with your thought leaders. Answer them in text, in video, in infographics, in all kinds of different modalities, and put those answers out on the platforms that your audiences use. So when you do that, you're giving this total brand narrative. You're building out your digital footprint and allowing these humans who are operating these machines to more easily find you.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. let me
I get
think
that
about
a lot. Work on my clarity. Huh?
No. It was very clear. Okay, I mean, clearly you have to start with the strategy, and you are right to bring that up first because, one of the things that I keep seeing with clients, and I'm sure you do the same, is they immediately jump into the execution, jump into the tactical stuff. Like, okay, Mariah, we need a video because, I saw somebody else doing that, and we definitely have to have a video. Oh, and we need we need these video shorts about XYZ and the content. It's like, okay, hang on. But what are we going to communicate in that video?
Yeah.
What's the video going to be about?
What's
What's the story? And in this day and age, what's the call to action? Like, okay, once they watch the video, when they're done, what do you want them to do? Right? Where do you want them to go? Right? If they click on something, where is it going to redirect them to? So there's all these questions, right? And if you have the content strategy to begin with, then at least you have that framework, right? It's almost, and you probably have your own analogies that you use. I like to always use the real estate analogy of like building a house, right? Would you build a house if you didn't have an architect's blueprint?
Right.
What's the house going to look like, right?
For a few minutes till it falls down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely agree with, doing all that research and interviewing the SMEs. And from there, you can generate the long form content and the video clips. etc., infographics. You did mention something about YouTube, and I wanted to go back to that, right? Because we've been playing around with that as well. How do you get buy-in from somebody in higher ed? I could kind of see, but how do you get buy-in from somebody in healthcare or in research to put their content on YouTube?
So one of the ways that I found to help people get comfortable with making YouTube content or any video content is start with a text-based piece. So if you can interview a subject matter expert, kind of like you and I are doing right now, Christian, and just
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, we're going to build this article. Do you mind if I record this? And usually they'll say, is it just for notes? And you say, yes, just for notes. You build out the text piece. And then when you send that to them for review or to their, whoever needs to look at that, say, hey, Dr. So-and-so really sounded great when they described this. Could we pull an audio segment and embed it in this article? Start them there. That's a pretty low risk. It's just their voice and sometimes a picture for the next time that you work together, because of course your piece is going to perform and they'll want to do more, right? Next time say, okay, we're going to plan to do the audio. Do you mind if we also grab a couple of little short video snippets and say, just like you told me when we started this, if you mess up, start over again, or just be very candid and say, we'll pull some clips at the end and thanks for your time, and just kind of surprise them with it. If you make them feel comfortable about it and kind of get their consent going into it, a lot of the times people feel a lot less stressed than if you just say suddenly, hey, can I do some video with you before you've really talked, right?
You have clearly done this before, because
for 10 years.
yeah, because no, I like the way that you packaged it, because basically the way that you're pitching it to them almost is you're doing it in phases, so it doesn't intimidate them, because it can be intimidating, right? But no, I think that that's really great. But once again, Mariah, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your expertise and experience with the listeners. Please, quick introduction to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
Yeah, great. I'm Mariah Tang. I'm the Chief Content Marketing Officer at Stamats. We're a professional services agency that serves higher ed and healthcare. So feel free to look me up on LinkedIn or out on Facebook.
Fantastic. And we'll be sure to drop the links in the show notes when the episode comes out. So once again, thanks so much for coming on the show. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Christian.
All right. Bye for now.